All right, we're going to go over the inequality study guide. I'm going to go pretty quick, but if you'll just look at the work, hopefully that will help you too. Okay, here, whenever you have a number by a letter, that is the multiplication, so the inverse would be to divide. So you divide both sides by the 2, and that gives you, just right here, to graph it, you want to have your variable in the front, just to help you read it correctly, to help you graph it correctly. So you flip all of this over. So see how it points at the X here? You want to make sure it still points at the X. Then when you graph it, you don't have a line under it. It's just less than. So you have an open circle and then it goes to the left. Okay, here is problem 2. Problem 2, the same thing. We're going to divide both sides by a -3. If you divide both sides by a negative, then you do need to reverse the inequality sign. And a -21 divided by a -3 gives you a +7. So this would be how you would graph that inequality. Okay, let's look at number 3. This one was done wrong a lot in class. So remember, you want to do the inverse of adding or subtracting first. So the first thing you're going to do in this problem is you're going to do the inverse of subtracting 5, and you're going to add 5 onto both sides. Those cancel. I have n over 2 is greater than or equal to 2. I then want to do the inverse of division, and I want to multiply by 2. So I multiply this side by 2 and that side by 2, and I get this answer. That line means it's going to be a closed circle. This inequality means I'm going to highlight to the right because n is greater than 4. Okay, if you'll look at problem 4, the same thing in this one as we had in the one over here. You're going to want to do the inverse of adding or subtracting. So you're going to want to do the inverse of subtracting 2 and add 2 onto both sides. A -3 plus 2 is a -1. Those cancel, so you bring down n to the 10th power. Now I want to isolate my variable 10, so I do the inverse of division and I multiply both sides by 10. Cancel, I get n, and 10 times a -1 is a -10. To help me graph it correctly, I'm going to flip it over. So I flip and change the sides here and reverse my inequality sign. And that's a closed circle highlighting to the left. Okay, let's look at number 5. In number 5, you need to remember to follow all of the steps to solve an equation. You do those same steps. So first you're going to do the distributive. So you want to remember, guys, don't, which is distributive, call combine like terms. You move the variable. After, inverse of add or subtract. And midnight, the inverse of multiply or divide. Okay, so I'm going to do the distributive first. When you do the distributive, you take what's in front and you multiply it times that. Then you take the 3 and you multiply it times a -2. That's how you get the -6. And then I just brought this down exactly how it was. That was the distributive. I do not have any like terms on this side or then on this side, so I don't do that. So now I'm going to move all of my variables to the same side of the equal sign. I chose to move this one. I could have chosen to move that. I chose to move this one because when I add 7R, I'm a -6 plus a +7 gives me 1. So it's just R. I bring down the -6. I bring down the -8. Inverse of subtracting 6 is to add 6, and then I get this answer. Open circle, R is greater than a -2. All right, over here I'm going to do the same things. So I am going to, first of all, do the distributive. here, and I'm going to multiply 3 times everything inside, and I get what is here. Okay, distributive, the C is combined like terms. Over on this side, I am able to combine the 3 and see it's positive. You always look at the sign in front and the 5. So that gives me 8. And then I just brought down the minus 6x. Now I want to get all my x's on the same side. I want to move variables to the same side. So to do that, I decided to do the inverse of minus 6x and add 6x to both sides. Those cancel, and this gives me 3x. Now I'm going to do the inverse and add 10 to both sides because I want to do the inverse of add or subtract. And then I do the inverse of multiplication, and I divide both sides by 3, and I get this answer. So x is greater than 6. Open circle on the 6, highlighted to the right. Okay, last 2 problems. These are compound inequalities. These are the AND type. So I decided to solve these. I'm going to make them into 2 inequalities. So I basically take from this inequality sign over, and that gives me this one. And from this inequality sign over, and that gives me that one. And I solve it using inverse operation. I do the inverse of adding or subtracting on both sides by adding 6 to both sides. And then I do the inverse of multiplication by dividing everything by 10. And this is what I get. I reverse this so I have the variable first. And then when I graph it, it will be in between because it's and I do have open circles. Okay, here it's the same thing, it's and, so I'm going to set up 2 inequalities. One is from this inequality sign over, so that's here, and the other side is from this inequality sign over, and that inequality's here. So I do the inverse of adding 10, and I subtract 10 from everything. I reverse this one. Now, when I do my, when I graph it, this one on the -7 is an open circle, and this one on the -3, because of that, is going to be a closed circle. Okay, let's turn to the back. Okay, here's problem 9. Problems 9 and 10 are compound inequalities with OR. So I solve each of them individually. You can see I do the inverse of the adding or subtracting. And then I do the inverse of multiplication and I divide. Over here, the same thing. This right here is multiplication. So I'm going to do the inverse of this -4. I'm going to add 4 on both sides. And a -94 plus a +4 is a -90. Now I messed up on here first, so you really got to watch these. I'm going to divide both sides by the -9. So be sure and carry down on the -9. And so when you divide both sides by a negative, you do have to reverse the signs. So these are both open circles and they both then go out. Okay, and the next one, it is also an OR. So for this one, I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing the inverse of the adding or subtracting on both sides. And then I do the inverse of the multiplication and I divide. This is also one that I'm dividing both sides by a negative, so I reversed my inequality sign. This one is an open circle on the 1 and then highlighted to the right. Okay, here I'm going to add 7 to both sides and then I divide everything by 4 and this is what I get. So I do a closed circle on the -8 and then it's highlighted to the left. All right, this problem, find all of the integers, values that for x that satisfy the inequality. So that's everything that x could be that would be greater than a -4 and less than x. Excuse me, greater than or equal to a -4. So it could be a -4, and then everything greater until 4, because it says x is less than 5. So it has to be something less than 5. So these are the numbers that it could possibly be. Those would be the number set. Okay. This one, you take that same inequality, and then we want to know which one of these is true. Well, if you take answer A and you divide both sides by 2, you get exactly this part of your inequalities. So your answer would be A. Because here, if you divided both sides by 2, you would get x is greater than or equal to 5. Well, that's not the true statement. This, it would be x is greater than a -5. That is not there, and that is not there. Okay, let's look at number 13. Problem 13. These are her 3 test scores. She's going to have one more, or evaluations. So we're going to average them by adding them and divided by 4. So I added them, plus G. But let me hold on a second. I got rid of the 4 on the bottom of this by doing inverse operation. So I multiplied this side by 4, and I multiplied this side by 4. So then I'm here. So I multiplied this side by 4, that side by 4. I added these, so I have this. Then I do the inverse and subtract 249 from both sides. So I find out her 4th evaluation must be an 87 equal to or greater than an 87 for her to get an average of at least an 84 on all 4 of them. Okay, and then I set up this inequality. You're going to the Wilson County Fair. So it's kind of like your parents give you $50. What you spend over here, this part needs to be less than or equal to the $50 that they give you. Well, it's $12 just to get in admission, plus $15 for your lunch. And then you're going to pay $1.25 per ticket. So you're going to solve this to see how many tickets can you buy. So I'm going to combine like terms, do the inverse of this, subtract 27 from both sides, and then divide by $1.25. And I find out that I can buy, my amount of tickets has to be less than or equal to 18.4. I can't buy part of a ticket, so that means I could buy up to 18 tickets or less. And then on the last part, we have these answers, and this one was C. I did not finish filling that part in. This is D, and that's D. So that is your study guide. Practice over these problems, and then good luck on the test on Friday, September the 13th. Thank you.